Good morning. صباح الخير. I don't know in Spanish, esta mañana or Buenos Aires. Bonjour. Her Excellency, Miss Angie Mustaha, the Minister of Basic Education, South Africa, also acting President. Dr. Amina Muhammad, even she will be online speaking. Deputy Secretary General, United Nations, Mr. Mohibi Mabella, Sadatu President, Miss Diana Ayala, GCE Youth and Student Activist, Dr. Subhi Tawil, Future for Education Director, UNESCO, our friend, Dr. Leonardo Guerrier, Special Advisory to the Secretary General on Transforming Education Summit, United Nations. We are very happy to have you, Dr. Leonardo. Dear comrades and friends, let me start by thanking each one of you, your organizations, networks, and coalitions for attending our 7th World Assembly, which after many years, we are finally celebrating today in Johannesburg, the headquarters of GCE Secretariat. I would also like to thank the messages of solidarity that we have received from Dr. Amina Muhammad, UN Deputy Secretary General, Yasmin Sharif, Education Cannot Wait Director, Rob Jenkins, UNICEF Director of Education and Adolescent Development, Stefania Giannini, UNESCO Assistant Director General for Education, and Charles North, GBE Partnership for Education Interim GBE Chief Executive Officer. We are here in South Africa. Here in South Africa, there is a history of struggling against racism, against inequality, against discrimination and exclusion. There is here and there is the voice of freedom and hope. Here we remember those who died to protect the dignity of their people and our dignity. Those who taught us how to stand for a greater cause. Let us stand for those who are giving meaning to our meeting today. We remember those heroes, Nelson Mandela, Oliver Tambo, Albert Lutuli, Sivaku Makhoto, Yusuf Dado, Steve Biko, and many others. We remember the heroines. Winnie Mandela, Mother of the Nation, Charlotte Maxey, Dora Tamani, Ray Alexander, Albertina Sisolo, and many more. We are thankful and proud of all of them. Otherwise, we will not be able to stand here. The COVID-19 pandemic has affected millions of families and hundreds of human rights activists. GCE is the largest civil society movement working for the right to education in the world, and we have also been hit by the health crisis. However, despite the catastrophe that our communities and our organization have experienced, we are still here within passion and joy. We continue standing up, fighting for justice and equality, convinced that we have emerged strengthened and enlightened by the solidarity of our people. I want to pay tribute at the time to the hundreds of teachers, students, and activists and their families who are no longer with us due to COVID-19. Their legacy lies in us and fuel that conviction to turn schools into safe spaces where children and youth can always play and learn. After 23 years, we know that the GCE has always prevailed during times of greatest adversity. Because of our work is inspired by the struggle of the marginalized, the dispossessed, those who suffer violence and discrimination. We have built bridges with the stones thrown at our comrades, and we respond to hate speech and intolerance with the reasons raised by women and youth, people with disability and children. Diversity is the flag that flies in our sky and that makes us an unstoppable force, guided by the conviction that no one can lift behind and that justice and democracy can only be formed with true inclusion in all areas of life. The realization of the human rights to education needed multiple efforts from all sectors of society, but especially involves compliance with specific obligation of governments and the international community. The fight for education is not limited to guaranteeing its availability and universal access, because the content of education is governance and administration, and the challenge of teaching and learning are essential parts of this enabling human rights. This state obligation must be interconnected and seek to break down the barriers imposed by the discrimination, colonialization, and injustice, according to the international human rights law and the Education 2030 agenda. For this reason, education financing must be motivated by the construction of education system aiming at promoting human rights as a way of life. This can be happen if political leaders support the new global compact for financing education based on fundamental pillars of tax justice, the elimination of predatory debt, and the progressive, deductible, and innovative increase of domestic financing. We must not forget the historical gap that weighed on early childhood education and adult education, which have not only been denied financing, but also deprived of the necessarily infrastructure and teacher training condition for their operation. If the regressive policies of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank do not adopt these demands, progress will be much slower and painful. And for this reason, we must insist that the path to development must be built from the human rights perspective, and that lifelong learning is a fundamental right that must be secured. Education continues without receiving the resources needed. The market-based frameworks reinforce education inequalities. It is this simplistic and cost-benefit reductionist paradigm that encourages the privatization of education, and is the same that points of deepening countries' indebtedness in response to low domestic investment. The economization of the education debate is a political and ideological measure whose objective is to displace education aims as stated by the international human rights law, which is binding on government but refractory of development banks. Unfortunately, most governments have failed to make the necessary investment in education system to provide the support teachers desperately need to perform their roles and enjoy a decent standard of living. GCE believes that teacher shortage affects the entire planet because the construction of the global citizenship based on the respect and the promotion of the human rights can only be achieved by overcoming all forms of exclusion and marginalization. This weakening has a dramatic effect on educational process, but mainly it reveals that rather than learning crisis, the world is facing a crisis of inequality and violence, which take part in domestic spheres and will as an emergency situation that had unfortunately worsened. So, for example, the recent report in Education Under Attack states that in 2021, there were more than 5,000 attacks on education and incidents of military use of schools and universities, harming more than 9,000 students of educators in the last at least 85 countries. Conflict, occupation, and climate change related emergency are leaving millions of internally displaced people, refugees, and asylum seekers without the opportunity to enjoy their right to education, numbering more than 70 million of internally displaced people, refugees, and asylum seekers. This crisis of inequality and violence should lead us to transform education according to the initiative promoted by the UN Secretary General and his notable and respected special envoy, who is here with us today. The concept of the transformative education primarily refers to the emancipatory notion of change, envisioned as a catalyst for change. Education aimed to challenge unfair social structure and to promote knowledge as the way to expand individual and collective freedom, opportunity to enjoy their human rights, and to contribute to a democratic and fairer society. We do not believe that transforming education consists in making companies richer and more efficient, whose primary function education-wise should be paying the taxes to fund the free, inclusive, quality education and quality public educational system. The most urgent transformation of education must be aimed at strengthening its democratization potential, its ability to offer holistic approaches, and its flexibility to respond to the diversity of the students, which, with or without disabilities, and include everyone in environments in which people are valued for who they are and not for what they have. Having children, youth, and students at the center of educational action is a huge challenge. Nevertheless, we are witnessing alarming trends of increasing restriction and criminalization of student expression across countries and regions. These authoritarian attitudes are unacceptable and even more contradictory to the purpose behind the Transforming Education Summit and the international human rights framework in general. No special funds are needed to respect the dignity of the people, whatever their age, gender, ethics, belonging, disability, or social background. But changes are urgently needed to patriarchal colonialization mentalities in our society, and especially in the international institution and organization that work outside the human rights framework. We are aware that the historical space that had been reserved for civil society is shrinking every day. The seat once destined for our movement, today our disputed and often reserved for the representation of large corporations. The privatization paradigm is a clear example for the wrong decisions that have been made in international government spaces, but it is also challenges that we are ready to respond to. The undistributed leadership of the Global Campaign for Education should bring about the changes needed to embrace urgent gender transformative inclusion education frameworks. All of you are key players in this fight. You are all indispensable. As we have mentioned before, these winds of change are blowing strong, and the Global Campaign for Education will point out the strategic course to initiative towards a world of solidarity, justice, and peace. I would like finally to thank my colleagues in the board of directors, which really they work hard to make this achievable. And also, let me also thank and give special thanks to the Secretariat, who is really the soldier behind everything. And let me give a special thanks to my friend who worked day by and night, my dear friend Grant, the global coordinator. And I am apologize if my English was not good enough, but my teacher, he told me, if your goal is clear, doesn't matter which language you will speak, the people will understand you. And our goal is clear. Thank you.
Je ne peux m'empêcher de demander encore d'autres ovations pour mon président, parce que c'est un message assez fort, profond, et qui embrasse toutes les préoccupations pour lesquelles nous nous battons au quotidien dans nos différentes organisations et à travers, bien sûr, notre réseau mondial, qui est la campagne mondiale pour l'éducation. Merci, Monsieur le Président. Nous apprécions vraiment à sa juste valeur ce message fort qui a été donné et qui, je l'espère, à passer dans l'esprit de tous ceux qui sont ici présents. Donc, sur ce, je voudrais également vous inviter maintenant à attendre une autre communication, un autre message. Je voudrais inviter Madame, Son Excellence, Madame Angie Massa, ministre de l'Éducation de base de l'Afrique du Sud et intérimaire du président, à nous rejoindre. Madame la ministre.
Program Director, let me acknowledge the UN Deputy Secretary General Amina Mohammed. Also acknowledge the President, thank you very much, President. Acknowledge the Director Yasmin Sharif, the Assistant Director General, the CEO, the NGOs that are present here. I saw young people here and SGB associations. I also saw my president also from our local teacher union. So I guess there are also some of them. But ladies and gentlemen, in my language, I say, Dumelang, Sanbonani, Absheni, Dimachero. We have 11 languages that we recognize, but we have more than that. But Program Director, it is indeed for us a distinct honor and privilege to address the 7th Global Campaign for Education hosted here in our country with the theme of the future of education reimagined. So according to GCE, the theme derives from the notion that the current education system is clearly not adequately preparing our learners for climate and ecological emergency, for a world that is more socially just, equitable, and embracing diversity in all its forms. Yes, indeed, the current COVID-19 pandemic has even exacerbated many social inequalities in our society, within schooling, and that reforms needed are quite urgent. What is needed is a complete and radical transformation of schooling and the wider education system, so education can be transformative once again. According to the recent report from the world bodies, including the World Bank, UNESCO, UNICEF, and the UK government, Foreign Commonwealth, USAID, and the Melinda Bill Gates, they've all induced the West shock. They all agree that COVID-19 has induced the West shock to the education system worldwide. As a result of the West shock, the education and learning is recorded in recorded history. The multi-agency report says learning poverty has increased by a third in low and middle income countries. This means that, according to the report, that an estimated 70% of the 10-year-olds cannot understand even simple written text. So without urgent attention, this global learning crisis will become a generation catastrophe. So Program Director South Africa, we did measure COVID-19 related learning losses by comparing how much children learned in 2020 with what they had learned a year before. And these measures indicate that between 50% and 75% of a typical year's worth of learning was lost during 2020 alone. Our curriculum recovery strategy gained momentum only after Cabinet rescinded all COVID-19 restrictions and lockdowns, because we had to rotate learners. Some came once a week, the next 1 week a month, then 2 weeks a month, the other 2 weeks, others had to rotate days. And it did hamper learning quite seriously because not only were they losing on time, but they were also losing on learning. So our curriculum recovery strategy gained momentum since Cabinet did rescind all COVID-19 restrictions. On the other hand, we also decided to develop and implement a comprehensive national strategy to deal head-on with the reading for meaning conundrum. We have to ensure that all school-going children learn to read for meaning and comprehension by their 10th birthday as per the President's directive. So according to the Center for Development and Enterprise, South Africa has both a chronic shortage of mid-level technical skills and a crisis of youth unemployment. The not in school employment in our country phenomena demonstrate that youth employment has reached a crisis point. We have estimated 3.4 million learners who are not in education, in training or employment between the ages of 15 and 24, compared to the 1.6 million that are at universities and colleges. So to tackle the growth constraints exemplified by this shocking figure, we agree that the country needs an accessible and quality education alternative to degree or diploma studies. It is our moral obligation, we believe, not to add to the growing number of young people without a basic education level. In this regard, we have decided to modernize our curriculum for the 21st century learners by developing a framework for vocational and occupational, or what we call the three-stream curriculum. And this three-stream curriculum offers vocational education and technical occupational pathways added to the academic pathways. This curriculum shift towards a three-stream model owes its birth to the 2011 National Development Plan of our country that does call for differentiated pathways in the basic education sector. This plan says that different parts of the education system should allow learners to take different paths that offer high-quality learning opportunities. The introduction of the three-stream model has led to a plan to incrementally establish what we call focus schools, which are schools for specialization, including medicine, science, technology schools, engineering, and art schools. So the model is gaining momentum if one looks at learners' various national participation rates since its introductions with multiple subjects in the following areas: in civil technology, electrical technology, and mechanical technology. We have developed this model with 10 key points, and these include research to strengthen the conceptualization and the rollout of the model, technical advisory support in areas of need, vocationally orientated curriculum for the general education and training phase, vocational, technical, and occupational curriculum for the further education and training phase, the general and education certificate, which helps us to plan teacher training development, advocacy, partnerships, HR and finding, and piloting of all the areas that we're looking at. We have also established partnerships with various sector education and training authorities. So our partnerships include Ford South Africa, which has already given us about 240 engines, UNICEF also helping us with coding and robotics, Social Foundation is also helping us with technical maths, and our mobile networks, MTN and Vodacom, helping us with connectivity. Because for all the ambitions that we have, we don't have adequate resources within the state to match that which we're supposed to be doing, and hence we had mobilized the local business, international partners, but also partners from even professionals themselves to come and help us with the curriculum, with the support and the training of our educators. For instance, the European Union supported the development of the sector policies and reforms, improving governance and service delivery as part of the education for employability. And the grand idea is to offer school technical subjects that lead to apprenticeship, some competence in a specific area before looking for learnerships post-schools. So one can say that this model, we cannot say it's a silver bullet, but we think it will indeed help us to deal with some of our difficulties. We will finalize some of the curricular areas. As I say, we've mobilized professionals to also come on board and assist us. This year, the sector restarted the curriculum review which was delayed by COVID-19 crisis. We are conducting comprehensive curricular strengthening that will take into cognizance learners' competence they need to thrive socially and economically in a fast-growing world. But one fundamental approach in bringing this vision to life is to mainstream competencies which include knowledge, skills, values, and attitude. And I think that's what also the President emphasized. So we seek to deliberately and systematically ensure that the curriculum assessment policy, because that's one thing that also COVID helped us with, because with limited teaching time and learning time, we really had to look at what is it that we're assessing if we have to promote kids to the next grade who have lost almost 50% of their learning. And it helped us to really look at our assessment principles, for instance, that we know which has been our historical approach to assess what learners have learned. But now we've learned to assess for learning. What is it that our children have as basics or fundamental skills which enable them to go into another level of learning, which is one of the things that we've really gained a lot from really playing around, rebooting our system since the COVID advent. For instance, the recent studies have revealed the differences and similarities between the different certificates that we have. It is not true that the public education has failed to live up to its expectations, but indeed, and we can quote from a report that came recently from our assessment standard body provided by Umalusi, which is a council that sets and monitors standards for education in South Africa, and said the report was aimed to research the standing of our national senior certificate in comparison to other similar qualifications from 5 other jurisdictions. We compared ourselves to the International Baccalaureate Diploma Program. We compared ourselves to the Kenyan Certificate for Secondary Education, the New South Wales Higher Education Certificate, the Zimbabwean Form 5-6 Advanced Level, and the Cambridge Assessment. And the primary findings were that South African National Certificate has a longer duration and more compulsory subjects and compared to other systems. But the long and short was saying it was confirming the standing, the currency, and the value of the certificate that we offer as a country. Because even besides, whilst confronted by COVID-19 and re-looking our system, we thought we should start from where we are so that when we rebuild, we reboot, and build better, we should have a sense of what is the currency of that which we have. And that for us was a very helpful report. And I won't bore you with all the breakdowns of what they said about different subjects. For instance, in English, it says our certificate or our qualification is similar to other curricula and is comparable with international standards. In geography, it says it's effectively structured and designed. It says we show less emphasis on mechanical topics and the use of technology and more emphasis on special skills such as interpreting graphics. Because what we have started off since the COVID advent and also with the pressure to reimagine education, we thought we should assess and evaluate what we have so that we build on a solid ground. We have a good understanding of what the shortcomings are so that as we build, we know what we're building from. And that's why we took this program. And again, for instance, a program director, the research indicates that the labor market values the national certificate, and this positive attitude has remained a positive throughout the years. So according to the reports, for instance, a child in our country, and it also talks about the monetary values that come, because I think, again, I heard from the secretary also, when we were speaking in the holding room, to say if you don't advance and promote education, you're promoting poverty, you're promoting underdevelopment, you're promoting also all sorts of negative phenomena. We also had to say what is the currency, so that we can be able to motivate our learners about the value of education to make sure that we keep our children at schools as long as we can. We also had to look at the question of girl children. We're looking at actually the issues of children with disabilities, but also inclusive education for children who are different, either the queer community. What are the impacts that every other thing that we have in terms of your infrastructure, your curriculum, and even your pedagogy, if we're not leaving anyone behind. And you can know our country is very conservative, it's very religious. We talk about diversity, you really are you're shaking a tree that has beads, so must be ready to be beaten. But we are confident that we have to really confront every other aspect if we have to make sure that we don't leave any child behind. And that's why we're reviewing, as I say, in terms of employability, in terms of inclusivity, but also in terms of relevance, in terms of currency and sustainability. And that's the work that we're doing now. We know that, for instance, we also looked at the question of girls, and know that girls who receive an education are less likely to marry young and are more likely to lead healthy and productive lives and can take care of their families. And again, because we had a conscious and a deliberate program to support the girl child, we can confidently and proudly say we've reached the level of equity, if not excess. And that's why we're even now looking at the boy child, to make sure that the boy child does not remain behind, because if the boy child is left behind, it causes drama. It brings violence, it brings all sorts of difficulties. So we have, as I say now, as a conscious, deliberate effort, say, yes, indeed, our programs have worked for the girl child. Our girl children are staying longer. We have more participation rates amongst girl children. We have higher pass rates amongst girl children. And now it says the other part is lagging behind and it's causing us lots of problems. We have high levels of gender-based violence. We have and we really also subscribe to the fact that I think we have not adequately given attention or equal attention to the boy child. So as we continue to support the girl child, we've taken a decision that we have to strengthen and have a special focus on the boy child. So according to UNESCO reports, girls' education does, as I say, we all believe that it strengthens economies, it reduces inequalities, but it actually helps build better societies because children of educated mothers are healthier, they stay long in school, they're supported. But if a mother really is unable to look after herself, then is unable to look after the family. And that's why for us it's very important that we have to make sure that we support the girl child. But in short, President, the Secretariat, and the GCE committee, we are very grateful that you really chose us to host you. We're looking forward to the deliberations, and we will really make sure that as we relook at our own education, because we are really in the process of reimagining our education system itself. COVID has helped us to really, it forced us to accelerate not only the rebuilding from the effects of COVID, but to say now that we have an opportunity to rebuild from the crisis that we had from COVID, we might as well do it once and for all and look at all the other aspects of inclusivity, of justice, and all other related matters. That's why we're not only looking at the recovery of learning losses, but we're reimagining the entire system to make sure that indeed it is where we are. So this will be for us a very good lesson, exercise to learn from, and it will enrich the work that we are doing, and indeed we will benefit a lot from the work that you do. So thank you very much, President, for allowing us to host the event, and thank you very much for joining us in our country. You are welcome.
And greetings to everybody. The GCE President included the Minister and Acting President of the country, the Minister of Education, Mayor Njimtsera, all guests and delegates. Allow us as SATU to share with you a perspective on the role of teachers in protecting the right to education. We have touched here on policy imperatives that Article 26 of the UN Declaration of Human Rights states that everyone has a right to free, quality education, and that the elementary education is compulsory. This is in line with our own constitution, Section 29 of the Constitution, Section 1, which enshrines the right of basic education and the right to further education. So the right to education is a human right, and education is indispensable means of realizing other human rights. As an empowerment right, education is the primary vehicle by which economically and socially marginalized adults and children can live themselves out of poverty and obtain means to participate fully in their communities. Education has a vital role in empowering women, safeguarding children from exploitative, hazardous labor and sexual exploitation, promoting human rights and democracy, protecting the environment, and controlling population growth. Increasingly, therefore, education is recognized as one of the best investments states can make. But the importance of education is not just practical. A well-educated, enlightened, and active mind is able to wander freely and widely. That is the joy and rewards of human existence. So, promoting education as a human right and a public good, it's what we encourage GCE to endeavor. So quality education nurtures human talent and creativity, thereby contributing to the personal and professional development of individual person, as well as to social, cultural, economic, political, and environmental development of society as a whole. It is within this context that governments must be the guarantors and primary providers of education systems, and as such, it has the key responsibility of ensuring that free, universally accessible education is well-resourced and constantly updated and developed. By raising funds through progressive taxation, it can and must invest a substantial proportion of state budget in education. Such investments should ensure the balanced development of all education sectors, from early childhood education through to higher education and lifelong learning. The state, in cooperation with teacher unions, should oversee and regulate the education sector with the aim of constantly improving its quality, establishing and implementing a legislative framework that ensures a high-quality service, professional standards, access for all, and a representative governance system. In short, the state is responsible for financing, provisioning, and regulation of all education institutions. On improving the quality of education, we're saying the importance of quality teaching for quality education cannot be underestimated. To this end, teachers at all levels of education must be appropriately trained and well qualified. Teachers should continue their professional development upon recruitment through a period of induction into the profession with the support by a mentor, and should have access throughout their careers to high-quality continuous professional development and learning. These opportunities should be provided by the state at no cost to individual teachers. The teaching and learning environment should be designed in such a way that it supports teachers and education employees in their missions. The state should provide the necessary infrastructure and resources to cater for the environment. In promoting equality through inclusive education, it is the responsibility of the state to ensure that all citizens have access to high-quality education appropriate to their needs, supported by the Universal Declaration on Human Rights and a series of international multilateral instruments. National policies. SADC maintains that all barriers to education must be removed in order to make education accessible to all persons, regardless of their gender, background, or personal characteristics. SADC therefore promotes the concept of quality education and the opportunity and access to all levels of education. No one should be disadvantaged because of perceived differences, including those based upon gender, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, faith, cultural or economic background, or personal characteristics. People with disabilities should be assisted to achieve their maximum potential. In the interest of time, the remaining headlines, one would like to say, among them, because this you would have electronically, preserving the rights of an HIV-infected child. It's very important, and we must make sure that in our campaigns, we don't drop the ball. Also, embracing children with disabilities and issues around gender-based discrimination be tackled. Privatization or commercialization of education have to be challenged, and so are the budget cuts or austerity measures in education. And promotion of indigenous languages for teaching and learning is vital for all of us. Lastly, climate change education should be taken serious, and the digital divide exposed by COVID-19. On SATU's behalf, we are thankful for the invite and wish you fruitful deliberation in this 3 days conference. But as you sit down, we must say we are disappointed that yesterday one of the killers of, in fact, he's one and the only killer that we know, Janusz Walus, who is to be out on parole. This is the man who single-handedly killed Chris Hani, the former General Secretary of the SACP. So this is opening old wounds of what apartheid did to us. And we would have loved that while we are a constitutional democracy, at least the truth should have come out to say, because he pulled the trigger, who are the people, who are the mastermind behind the killing of Chris Hani. He goes back, we don't know that, and it would remain that way. That's what makes it even more painful. Thank you, all of the best in your deliberations. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur le Secrétaire Général, pour ce message à la fois fondateur pour nos démarches dans la défense du droit à l'éducation et surtout pour l'aspect émouvant de la fin de votre intervention. Nous sommes, en tout cas avec vous, dans l'épreuve que vous traversez. Je voudrais quand même faire un petit commentaire aussi sur ce message qui a été livré. Il montre clairement, une fois de plus, l'importance de l'éducation dans la vie d'un homme. Si l'éducation est considérée comme un droit pour toute personne, c'est que toute vie part de l'éducation et finit par l'éducation. Et les aspects, les domaines dans lesquels cela se constate, domaine économique, domaine politique, dans tout, social, etc., montrent à souhait qu'on n'a pas le choix. La seule voie unique pour que l'être humain s'en sorte libre et s'épanouisse, c'est par l'éducation. C'est pourquoi nous avons tous différents rôles. Il y a le gouvernement, il y a les syndicats, il y a les associations. Chacun a sa part en tout cas de responsabilité et d'apport pour que ce droit-là puisse être sauvegardé partout. Et c'est un devoir pour ceux qui sont vraiment conscients de l'impact de l'éducation dans notre vie, de s'investir, d'appeler aussi ceux qui sont assez natifs pour investir à le faire et d'appeler toujours à la réalisation des valeurs à travers l'éducation. Merci, Monsieur le Secrétaire général. C'est en tout cas ce que j'ai pu lire entre les lignes dans votre message. Nous allons maintenant passer à une autre communication. Après Monsieur le Secrétaire général de la SATU, nous allons écouter, inviter plutôt Madame Diana Ayala. Ah, non, c'est déjà, je crois que, est-ce qu'elle est là? Diana, la représentante des jeunes étudiants activistes.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Diana Ayala, as he mentioned. I am part of the YAG group, the Youth Action Group of the GCE. I am representing my coalition, national coalition, which is Foro Dakar Honduras. And as well, I'm very honored to present my regional coalition, which is Latin American Campaign for Education, CLADE. I'm part of it, and I'm very proud of being part of that. And also, I'm proud of being part of GP Youth Leader Group. So welcome everyone to this World Assembly. And I think this is a very important moment to connect, to learn, to progress, and more. And I am very grateful, as many have mentioned before, of being here after the pandemic of COVID-19 that actually had many people losing lives, many people grieving and having losses. So I'm very grateful to be here today. I think that it's very important to mention that the theme of this assembly is the future of education reimagined. That is the name of that. And I think as youth activists, I believe that we need to also actively share our thoughts about education reimagined. What is it, what we want to see, and how do we achieve this? I could mention many things, but all of them come to one point: active participation in spaces, youth and students actively participating. In March of this present year, we had the incredible opportunity with GCE to travel to Tanzania, a group of different youth and students from different spaces and organizations. And we had this actually with the purpose of working together to build actually this YAG and to have education advocates and have a group of youth and students within the GCE space working towards specific objectives. As GCE grows and strengthens its youth and student engagement, it has become increasingly imperative to create spaces and platforms for youth and students to build bridges of solidarity and capacity across the membership. This was from the GCE Youth and Student Caucus 2022 report. The context of youth and student has been very limited for many years in spaces of decision and creation of policies. And adding to that, the pandemic has left even more barriers, showing that the education system, specifically in the lowest income countries, were not ready to attend the needs of the most marginalized students. The teachers were actually not ready to completely be able to switch from a physical learning to a digital learning. And that actually, even today, the rural communities, the rural areas, are continuing to be excluded. That we don't have plans and responses for the children that have disability, and the opportunities of work for youth are very limited. That privatization of higher education is also a barrier for many. Young people and students are often seen as apathetic, frustrated, and disenchanted. When they do organize, their work is devalued because they are thought of as inexperienced, trouble, and at risk of being derailed from responsible adulthood. This was also from an analysis of the impact of COVID-19 on youth and student spaces on the report 2022 from GCE. With all of these issues mentioned, as youth activists, what I can say is, no, these are not limits for us. These will not define our future, the future we want, or the education we reimagine. But of course, as youth, as students, as activists, we want the opportunities and spaces. We want our voices heard when policies are made, and we want our voices heard when budgets are built. Students are the prioritization in education. Nevertheless, how many times do we see student committees call to actively participate in the creation of laws? And how many times do we have actually the people that it's benefited from education sector call on this? How many times do we actually see these thoughts coming from within schools, from within the heart of education? Today is the moment to advocate for these spaces. It is also the time for youth and students to understand this role. And as I've mentioned before in many meetings, in many spaces, in many meetings, I think that we do not need to represent our personal interest, but the voices of all, and work together with solidarity to address the issues that we see every day. If we understand solidarity, then I think we have understood everything. I think GCE has been clear of the importance of seeing youth as equals and active partners, including our voices, having decision-making seats, collaborating in different youth initiatives, growing the collective voices. Also, and very important, the creation of reports and strategies that give an actual update context of the realities of youth and students, which is very specific since we don't have a lot of research or studies that actually report how are the participation of youth and students. GCE has also given the opportunity to build capacities and knowledge, as well as collaborating with resources in order to achieve specific goals within our constituencies, to first structure our students' structures as well, to also include even more students and youth specifically, the ones that are left behind, and last, to actually give us the opportunity to have a space, to have our voices heard. I would love to see more Latin American students and youth represented in spaces. I would love to see also different supports from GCE. I know that we will achieve this if GCE supports us. It's helping right now. Latin America has a lot to offer, and we will continue here. We are not going anywhere. We are here to stay and demand free public education, quality education for all. That is what we see in Education Reimagined. Inclusive spaces for all, equal and fair opportunities for girls, not only to girls to enter school, but to actually stay in school, continue and finish their studies, and having the people with disabilities also attended, and having more democratic spaces. And the last thing, but not least, for me is investing in education. Thank you very much.
Ok, ça peut attendre. Alors, je vais remercier à votre nom à tous Diana pour son intervention, pour son message. Est-ce qu'on peut applaudir encore parce que elle a clairement reconnu que la campagne mondiale a compris que les jeunes constituent une composante importante pour défendre toujours ce droit dont nous parlons depuis ce matin, le droit à l'éducation. J'ai beaucoup aimé le fait qu'elle sache qu'il ne s'agit pas de défense d'intérêts particuliers, mais d'avoir une voix collective. Donc si elle est collective, elle devient objective. C'est-à-dire avec des préoccupations réelles qu'on peut considérer. Lorsqu'elle est individuelle, elle fait peur. Et parfois, lorsqu'il y a des déviations et des craintes de participation des jeunes, c'est parfois que ça ne relève pas d'un front commun. Donc merci vraiment d'avoir souligné cela et nous pouvons vous assurer que la campagne mondiale a désormais intégré cette nécessité de l'inclusion totale, c'est-à-dire tout le monde est pris en compte, les jeunes, toutes les composantes du genre, et je pense que c'est un message bien compris. Sur ce, nous allons, une fois de plus, écouter une intervention de taille aussi, provenant d'une personnalité mondiale. Et je vais citer, inviter Dr Shobi Tawil, qui est justement le directeur du futur de l'éducation au niveau de l'UNESCO. Donc, il n'est pas vraiment très à présenter. Bon, il y a juste à l'inviter pour venir passer son mot. Merci.
Merci beaucoup pour la présentation flatteuse. Thank you first of all to the Global Campaign for Education for the invitation, Rafat, President, and the whole team. A pleasure to be here also, and a privilege to be here in South Africa and having had the opportunity to hear the Minister of Education and also the President of the Teacher Union. It's a real pleasure to be here on the theme of the future of education reimagined, and it's also very encouraging to see how GCE continues to engage with the global dynamic around rethinking education, around transforming education, around reimagining our futures together. And a first milestone in this global dynamic is perhaps the report of the International Commission on the Futures of Education, which was released exactly 1 year ago in November 2021. And since its release last year, the report, the Futures of Education report, has become one of the key references for the Transforming Education Summit process, which was launched earlier this year. Important, I think, to just say a word around why transform. And I would like to put forward, as does the report on the futures of education, two main reasons. First is that despite progress in expanding access to educational opportunity, we still see continued denial for hundreds of millions of children, youth and adults from the fundamental human right to education. We are in 2022, we are in the third decade of the 21st century, and how is this possible that we still have hundreds of millions of children, youth and adults who are not accessing the basic right to education? So more of the same will not do. This is a first reason why we should reimagine and rethink education and transform education. More of the same will not do. We need to do things differently. The second reason has got to do with probable and possible futures. And without going into it, we have heard from previous speakers, much of the discussion on the future of education is usually about adapting to the changes around us. But at the historical juncture that we find ourselves in what the UN Secretary General refers to as the risk of breakdown globally, we urgently need not to have education adapt to these changes, but to have education help change the direction, the course we are taking, and help shape a more sustainable, more just and more sustainable futures. So it's really only by transforming education that we can hope both to rectify the continued exclusions from the right to education and to ensure that education helps to shape more just and sustainable futures. So just to say, transformation from this lens is not about doing more of the same. It implies fundamental changes to educational processes. It's not starting from scratch. We heard the Minister of Education. There are strengths to build on, but we must, as we heard in the case of South Africa, critically re-examine our approaches, our models, and that recognizing that some of what we're doing is not working, it's even going in the opposite direction than what is desired. So that transforming education is not about better existing systems. Transformation applies education systems that are different from what we have. The proposal in the report of the Futures of Education is that we need to renew the social contract for education. The social contract being the vision of the purpose, the values and principles that drive this vision, but also a new social contract means new governance arrangements, new roles and new spaces for redefining the contribution of the different constituencies involved in education as a collective responsibility, as a public endeavor, as a common good. And common good is proposed intentionally to build and enrich the concept of public good. And that common good is about reaffirming the collective dimension of education as a societal endeavor, a shared responsibility. It does not undermine the responsibility of the state, but recognizes that all constituencies need to be involved. And so if we speak of education as a common good, we're also underscoring the need for cooperation across all of these constituencies. We heard students, youth, teachers, and the many others. But a cooperation based on the principle, and we just heard it from the last speaker, on the principle of solidarity. When we speak of common goods, we're also speaking of education that necessitates democratic participation, inclusive processes of public policy formulation and implementation with due accountability. So it is about new forms and institutions of participatory democracy, and I think this is one of the strong ideas we've been hearing throughout the morning. So just to, in wrapping up, in the same way, just to say perhaps that the report on the futures of education was not proposed as a blueprint, as a roadmap, but rather an invitation to public debate, advocacy, research, action on transforming education. It's an invitation to renew this new social contract. It requires, as we heard even from Amina Mohammed, a movement, a global movement to transform education. And GCE, with its membership of over 100 coalitions from across the world, all inspired and driven by the firm belief in education as a fundamental human right. The Global Campaign for Education actually is best placed to bring in the critically important voices of young people, of students, of militants in popular education, adult learning and education, and the many others who are working with their communities and with vulnerable populations. So in the same way that the Global Campaign for Education, many of you around the tables here contributed to the development of the report on the futures of education, this is really an invitation to engage with the transforming education process, the proposals put forward in the Futures of Education report, in redefining a new social contract for education, an education that can help transform our systems, transform them towards more just, sustainable futures for all. Thank you very much.
Une fois de plus, merci et nos ovations pour notre invité. Il y a un micro qui a disparu, donc je ne sais pas si ça va affecter les écoutes. Est-ce que ça va? Tout le monde entend? Ok, merci. Alors, donc, docteur Sobi nous a fait part de ce que représente le futur de l'éducation, d'abord en parlant de son origine, d'où c'est venu, et ensuite ce que c'est devenu. Alors, nous avons eu droit en tout cas à une explication de ce que c'est que ce futur de l'éducation, qui débouche encore sur la transformation de l'éducation, initialement lancé comme débat, après ça devient maintenant une vision et presque un programme qui fait que ça va maintenant inviter tous les acteurs, concerner tous les acteurs, en tout cas à s'investir dans le sens d'un changement radical dans le monde. Nous savons maintenant que transformer l'éducation, ce n'est pas changer quelques aspects de ce que nous avons l'habitude de faire. C'est totalement repenser, c'est-à-dire révolutionner l'éducation, de sorte que, au lieu que nous suivions les événements tels qu'ils viennent pour nous adapter, que ce soit nous qui adaptions les événements à ce que nous voulons être. Donc c'est le changement important de vision qu'il faut avoir ainsi de l'éducation. Ça veut dire quoi? Que bon, nous ne devons pas continuer à rechercher les mêmes solutions qu'avant, mais à créer. C'est la création qui est à la mode lorsque les hommes ou un groupe d'hommes ont des difficultés. Si on ne crée pas, si on ne transforme pas, on périt. Or, nous ne voulons pas périr. Donc, nous allons nous engager sur la voie de la transformation de l'éducation. Merci donc pour cette communication très intéressante. Et nous allons encore continuer à découvrir davantage. Cette fois, je ne sais pas si Roby est dans la salle. Il a l'habitude de nous détendre d'une certaine façon afin que bon, nos membres ne puissent pas s'engourdir pour ensuite s'alléger et puis bien écouter. Voilà. Bien, donc, est-ce que tu peux nous produire quelque chose pour détendre en attendant? Comme nous n'avons pas beaucoup de troupes, nous allons créer quelque chose qui ressemble à ça chez nous, avec Roby.
This is a surprise. Okay, good afternoon. My name is Robbie Guevara. I'm from the ASCBE, but also the International Council for Adult Education. So let's just you want us to start to move. So if we can stand up. I'm sorry if the translators will have to work with us. Let's all stand up. Okay, so make sure that you don't hit your neighbor. So move to the side. Okay, there we go. So I think this morning a lot of the speakers talked about this great, big, grand vision. Oh, big. I mean, it was a bigger vision, bigger. And the vision was not just one dimension. Our young people talked about us, education, the economy, the politics. So the vision should be around. So a very complex vision. But we also talked about how this vision has been grounded in our experience. We go to the ground. Harvesting our wins, harvesting our strengths, and getting ready with our tools for education. Okay? And so this World Assembly is our opportunity to be able to take this vision, harvest these experiences, and share with each other. So turn around and share with each other. Thank you.
Merci à Roby. Vous voyez que ça nous réveille et ça permet encore d'être plus d'aplomb. Bien, alors nous allons maintenant passer à la dernière intervention, au dernier message. C'est vraiment là une possibilité ouverte aussi d'avoir une petite interaction. Ça veut dire que c'est un message qui sera beaucoup plus court pour vous permettre peut-être d'avoir une ou deux questions si on a encore un peu de temps. Donc, le dernier intervenant de la matinée, c'est vraiment l'adresse principale aussi de cette matinée. Ça va être livré par encore une personnalité forte, mondiale, connue de tous, que nous voyons sur beaucoup de tribunes à cause de ses compétences dans le domaine et de sa connaissance du milieu, de ses réflexions très profondes et pertinentes sur l'éducation. J'ai nommé M. Leonardo Gamier. Donc il est spécialiste, en tout cas au niveau du secrétaire général pour la transformation de l'éducation, du sommet de l'éducation aux Nations Unies. Nous avons eu l'occasion de l'écouter tout dernièrement, en tout cas aux Nations Unies, au sommet, au 10 sommet. Et donc j'avoue que vous n'allez pas regretter. Donc, M. Leonardo, vous êtes invité à vous adresser au public.
Well, thank you very much. It is a real, first of all, it's a real honor, as Sobi was saying, to be here in South Africa, a country that has taught us so much about human dignity. And it is also a pleasure to be here in the assembly of the Global Campaign for Education, an institution, a conglomerate of institutions that work so hard for transforming education across the world. Of course, we have to start saying that the COVID pandemic, it has been mentioned before, dealt a terrible blow to education systems all around the world. However, as we strive to recover from the educational impact of the pandemic, it would be a mistake simply to go back, to recover from the losses and go back to where we were in 2019. The truth, as Sobi has just said, is that even before the pandemic, education was facing a global crisis, which is in fact a triple crisis. A crisis of equity, as millions are out of school. A crisis of quality, as many of those who are in schools are not even learning the basics. And of course, it is also a crisis of relevance, as many educational systems are not equipping the new generations with the values, the knowledge, the skills they need to be citizens in today's complex and rapidly changing world and work towards transforming that world. As we said at the Transforming Education Summit, and as UNESCO and the team that Sobi directed said in this Reimagine Our Futures Together, a new social contract for education, and as you're saying in the name of this meeting, we really have to rethink, to reimagine, to transform education so that it supports learners in 4 capacities that had already been mentioned many times, especially in the Delors reports in '96. We're saying that, in the first place, learners should learn to learn. What does this mean? They should develop the ability to read and write, to identify, to understand, to communicate clearly and effective. Sounds basic, but we're not doing it. They must also develop numeracy, digital, and scientific knowledge and skills. Education must also instill in them the curiosity, the creativity, and the capacity for critical thinking, and to nurture social and emotional skills, empathy and kindness. This is essential for developing their capacity to deal with complexity in an increasingly uncertain world. Second, they must learn to do. As life and the world of work undergo rapid and fundamental changes, so must education change in order to prepare every person for the challenges of the future, including the green, the digital, the care economy, and offering them lifelong learning opportunities, both in formal and in informal education. Third, and this is really a bigger challenge for educational systems, they must learn to live together. And this sounds easy, and it's probably one of the hardest things to learn. In a world of increasing inequality, rising tensions, fraying trust, weakened democratic culture, and dramatic environmental crisis, education must help us to live better with each other and better with nature. This has to do with ethics, with equality, with justice, has to do with civic responsibility, with democracy, with human rights that have been mentioned many times here. It has to do with the respect, the understanding, and the enjoyment of human diversity. Many times when we talk about human diversity, we use the word tolerance, that we have to be tolerant, and really, tolerance falls short. If I say I tolerate Sobi, it doesn't sound very nice. We have to learn to enjoy human diversity. That's the real challenge of this learning to live together. We need our capacity, our active commitment as global citizens with the goals of confronting poverty and inequality and promoting a more just and sustainable future. And I'd like to make a special emphasis here on the particular importance that the respect for human rights and the pursuit of gender equality has. This requires a gender-sensitive curriculum that promotes sex and effective education, addresses gender-based prejudice, norms, stereotypes, empowers and equips learners to combat violence against women and sexually diverse persons, and ensure adequate sexual and reproductive rights for all. Finally, and this is something, again, that educational systems very often forget or underestimate, our learners must learn to be. The deepest purpose of education lies precisely in learning how to live well, instilling in learners the values and capacities to lead a meaningful life, to enjoy that life, to live it fully. In Latin America, our original populations talk about el buen vivir, the good living, learning how to live a good life. That's essential. Education must expand every learner's potential for creativity and innovation, their capacity to enjoy and to express themselves through the arts. The arts sometimes in school are like, if there is some time left, we will do some singing and painting. No, the arts should be a central part of education. The awareness of history and the diversity of cultures, and their disposition for leading a healthy life, to practice physical activities, games, and sports. All those things have to be central to education. To meet these higher purposes, we must transform the curriculum and the pedagogy. We must teach and learn in a different way. But as we argued at the summit, we must also transform three essential elements of our educational systems. Because if this discussion about transformation remains like in the academia and does not reach the classroom, then nothing changes. Education only changes when it changes in the classroom. So the first thing, we have to transform our schools themselves. Education does not happen in a vacuum. If we want to solve the crisis of equity in education, we must transform schools into safe, healthy, inclusive, and stimulating learning places. The schools of the future, whether formal or informal, whether physical or virtual, must not exclude anybody. They should accept every person and make them feel welcome, cared for, protected, stimulated, and supported in their needs and according to their capacities. And this is very important for education to be inclusive. We have to take into account the many different capacities of each and every student. The school must become the space and time of human integration, of our coming together in our rich human diversity without discrimination of any kind, mockery, abuse, or aggression. Second, of course, and we already heard the Secretary of the Teachers Union, we have teachers. To transform education, we must support teachers so that they can also transform themselves into agents of change. Teachers must become knowledge producers, facilitators and guides in the comprehension of complex realities. They must be trained and empowered to transcend from passive to active, from vertical and unidirectional to collaborative. They must promote learning based on experience, on inquiry, on curiosity. They must develop the capacity, the joy, and of course, the discipline for problem solving. They should also guide their students in their learning to care for each other, to confront and solve conflicts peacefully, and to enjoy each other in their diversity. And of course, here we have a problem, is that in many countries, teachers are undertrained, undervalued, and underpaid. This must change to make sure that teachers are really empowered to bring this transformation into the classrooms. And third, we have something we didn't have before. We have the digital revolution. If harnessed properly, the digital revolution could be one of the most powerful tools for ensuring quality education for all and for transforming the way in which teachers teach and learners learn. But, and this is a big but, if we don't harness it properly, as we have seen during the pandemic, it could rather exacerbate inequalities and divide us into increasingly intolerant bubbles. The problem here is that these digital resources are typical public goods. And here I'm talking as an economist, because while they require a significant effort and a high fixed cost to be produced, once they are produced, they could be widely used by an increasing amount of teachers and students everywhere, with very little or no additional cost. If left to the market, such resources would become artificially scarce and quite expensive commodities. They will not be accessible to most teachers and students in the world. That is why we must effectively transform digital teaching and learning resources into global public goods, so that their financing, their design, production, and distribution is organized so as to guarantee free and open access of teachers and learners all over the world, allowing digital learning resources to effectively foster the sharing of human knowledge from an intercultural perspective. So we have to transform schools, to transform the teaching profession, to transform the access to digital learning resources. When we say all these things, of course, we have to think this is expensive. All this requires significant investments. And the fact is, as Diana was mentioning just a few minutes ago, that in today's world, we are not investing enough in education. It is not just that we are not investing enough, we are not investing equitably in education, and we are not investing efficiently in education. I usually don't like to use numbers in lectures because I give you a number and then you'll forget it in a minute. But let me mention a few numbers. Today, we invest roughly $5 trillion in education in the world. What does that mean? In average, that's about 6% of the world's GDP. 6%. But averages are deceiving. If we divide this in different income levels of countries, you have the following. High-income countries account for 63% of the global investment in education. That's about 2/3. But they only have to educate 10% of the world's children. So you have 2/3 of the investment for 10% of the children. Next, we have upper middle income countries with 29% of global educational investment and 15% of school-age population. On the other hand, we find lower middle income countries with only 8% of global investment in education, but they must educate 50% of the world's children. 8% for half of the children of the world. And in the bottom, you have the poorest countries, low-income countries, which are trying to educate 25% of the world's school-age population with 0.6% of the global investment in education. We are educating 3/4 of the world's children with less than 1/10 of the global investment in education. This obviously means that the resources we are investing per school-age person are very unequal across the world. They are reproducing educational inequality. Roughly, and I was surprised when I saw these numbers, but roughly by 2020, per capita spending in education was about $8,000 a year in high-income countries, $8,000 a year per person in school age. About 1,000 in upper middle income countries. So you go from 8,000 to 1,000. But if you ask for middle lower income countries, they invest $300 a year per school age person. And the lower income countries, only $50 per year per school age person. That is about $1 per week. You don't have to be an expert to know what that means. What this says is that in the low and lower middle income countries, the challenge of educational investment can only be solved if the national effort is substantially complemented by international cooperation. However, in most countries, from middle to upper middle income, this investment should be financed mainly with national resources. Why? Because it makes sense to do so. Investing in education should be seen not just as a moral and a political imperative, which it is, but it should also be understood as a sensible economic investment. There is plenty of evidence, and you have in the last 20 years, we have a lot of research projects. The Human Capital Project from the World Bank, for example, has done a lot of work on this. The Economic Commissions from the UN also. But basically, summarizing this research, it has been shown that a single dollar invested in education at the primary and secondary level yields an estimated $2.50 in additional gross lifetime earnings in lower middle income countries, and as much as $5 in lower income countries. That is a 500% return on investment. It is not easy to find investments that yield such a rate of return. And these are only the private returns. If we were to add the economic impact of indirect benefits of education, for example, impacts on health, impacts on culture, impacts on learning to live together better, we would find, for example, and this is an amazing number, that every dollar spent on early childhood development interventions would yield about $13 in economic returns. So, when you're an economist and you listen to these numbers, then you say, but if that is true, and we know that is true, why is it that we are not investing more in education? Because it sounds a little bit crazy. There is no fiscal space, the finance minister would probably tell us. I don't have money. But then, is that true? Is it true that there is no money in the world to invest in education? If you look at history, there has never been more money in the world. This is the richest period of human history. We have money for many different things. For example, I don't know if you know this, but at this moment, there are caskets of whiskey being aged at the space station. There is money for that. And there is money for three rich guys to invite their friends to give a tour around the space. So there's money for many things. Why is it that we don't create the fiscal space for education? Why is it that we don't pursue progressive revamping of tax systems that could increase tax to GDP ratios and open more fiscal space for the financing of education? If education has such a high rate of return, it should make economic sense to finance it. So why don't we do it? I think that to answer that question, and it's a very strange question because finance ministers are economists, and we economists are trained to invest in those things that have the highest rate of return. And yet we don't invest in education. To answer this question, we need to understand that there is a very strong relation between the kind of development, the kind of economy a country has, and the kind of education that comes with it. And it's a relation that goes both ways. Let me put it in very simplistic terms. It's more complicated, but we don't have the time. When a country is highly unequal and has a large supply of very cheap labor and of very cheap natural resources, it can find itself in what, in technical terms, we would call a low-level equilibrium, or in more colloquial terms, we could call it a poverty trap. What does that mean? The type of investments more easily attracted by the abundance of cheap labor are typically unsophisticated investments with low capital intensity, low productivity, little need for human capital, but still they can be very profitable, not because they contribute with increasing productivity, but because of their continued access to low-cost human and natural resources. With no need for an increasingly qualified labor force, there is little incentive from the economic sectors for raising taxes to finance education, which is perceived as a mere expenditure. I don't need to educate workers if I want them in a plantation using a machete to cut the sugar cane. They don't need to know trigonometrics for that. The situation can be even more complicated when countries get entangled into the typical race to the bottom, where they deregulate the labor market, the exploitation of natural resources, devalue their currencies, and grant generous and perverse tax incentives to further reduce costs and attract foreign investment. So you go into a vicious cycle of development. As many authors have argued, Robinson and Acemoglu most recently, but this is a very old argument, in countries where these extractive or low productivity economies prevail, the institutional framework, the political framework, tends to be weak, and the balance of economic and political power is significantly skewed towards the upper echelons of income and wealth. An unequal country in socioeconomic terms is also an unequal country in political terms. Again, this goes against the possibility of progressive tax increases that would be necessary to finance universal quality education and social development in general. The paradox here is that education is the only way out of a poverty trap. But poverty traps curtail the capacity to invest in education. Even though such an investment would make social and economic sense in the long term, but short-term profits will not allow it. So it will take vision, and more than vision, as had been said here before, It will take a movement capable of altering the balance of power for a country to break free from these poverty traps and embark on the virtuous cycle of sustainable development, increasing wages, increasing productivity, expanding and improving education, making a sustainable use of natural resources, and strengthening political institutions. In order to achieve sustainable development, less developed countries must transform education, but in turn, in order to transform education, they must also break free from perverse poverty traps and race-to-the-bottom strategies. Every country needs and deserves a good education for its people, all of its people, but every country needs and deserves a just and sustainable development. We'd like to say that education is a priority, but we don't put it in the budget. And forgive me, if something is not in the budget, it's not a priority. In the end, this is about ethics, and it is about politics. It's about changing the balance of power and escaping poverty traps. It is about reverting the dynamics of increasing inequality. And yes, education must play a key role in such transformation, and that's why we are here. And that's why we need the movement that you are promoting and for which I'm thankful. Thank you very much.